20 years after the murders, absolutely no one is satisfied. Not the parents of the girls, who still grieve daily for their daughters, who would all be in their mid-30s with kids of their own. Not the parents of the boys, who still believe in their innocence. Not the members of law enforcement, who still believe in their guilt. Texas Monthly's Mike Hall, 2011. In today's video, we look at an unsolved mystery that has haunted investigators for decades and been dubbed one of the worst unsolved crimes in Texas history. In a quiet corner of a Texas city, a seemingly ordinary yogurt shop was the backdrop for a heinous crime that shattered a community's sense of security. The yogurt shop murders are a true crime enigma that continues to confound, disturb, and captivate true crime enthusiasts for nearly 32 years. We will look at what most likely happened, who the suspects were, and a new breakthrough in the case that could finally put the families at peace with their loss. On December 6, 1991, firefighters in Austin, Texas responded to a fire at the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt store off Anderson Lane. However, what began as a structural fire soon turned into a quadruple homicide investigation when the corpses of 4 teenage girls were discovered inside the building. 3 girls, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, her 15-year-old sister Sarah, and 17-year-old Eliza Thomas were found bound, piled on top of one another, and shot in the head. 13-year-old Amy Ayer's body was found in a separate part of the shop. The evidence suggested that some had been sexually assaulted. Jennifer and Eliza were store employees, while Sarah and Amy were waiting for a lift home with Jennifer after the shop closed at 11 p.m. The homicides were committed with a .22 and a .380 caliber pistol, and the perpetrator or perpetrators likely escaped through an unlocked rear door. According to one of the original detectives on the case, the organized method of operation, the ability to control the victims, and the destruction of evidence by arson pointed to an adult with criminal experience rather than a teenager. Initial investigations revealed a large number of suspects, including a 15-year-old boy caught with a .22 pistol in a nearby mall days after the murders. Although he initially provided promising information, after intense interrogation, the detectives figured out that he was trying to acquit himself of the gun charge and eliminated him and 3 accomplices as suspects, none older than 17 at the time. A break in the case occurred in 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders, when new investigators decided to re-examine 4 teenage boys released in 1991. In 1999, police spent 18 hours interrogating Mike Scott, one of the many men initially questioned about the homicides. Scott composed a stunningly detailed confession in which he named Robert Springsteen, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn as his 3 accomplices. Springsteen also admitted to the crime and implicated Pierce and Wellborn. All 4 men were arrested soon after. What would later happen in the subsequent investigation and court trials is an all too often seen abuse of suspects and contentious interrogation techniques by the police. Since no record has been kept of what was said to the men during their interrogations in 1991, it is impossible to determine whether detectives provided information about the murders to the suspects during the initial interrogations. If the suspects referenced this information during later interrogations, it could be used to implicate them. 2 of the 4 defendants' self-incriminating remarks were the only reason they were brought to trial. The prosecution expounded in detail on the heinous nature of the crimes committed against the juvenile victims, but offered no other evidence besides the confessions. However, defense attorneys assert that the confessions were coerced due to abusive psychological interrogation techniques. After detectives repeatedly informed Scott that his high school classmates and eventual co-defendants, Robert Springsteen and Maurice Pierce, accused him of the homicides, Scott's pleas of innocence weakened. Scott's narrative begins to change after nearly 4 hours of rigorous interrogation and reassurances from the detectives that his friends had implicated him. "You need to say something really bad, buddy," detectives told Scott, "because this next phase is coming really quick and your opportunities are diminishing. But I think you realize that, don't you?" Scott gradually confessed that he was in the yogurt store early on the morning of December 6, 1991, the day of the homicides, as Pierce and Springsteen cased the location. During the night, he waited outside the store while Pierce and Springsteen committed a robbery. He later told police he was inside the store with a pistol and that he shot one of the girls, who prosecutors think was Amy Ayers. According to prosecutors, Scott disclosed details of the crime that only the perpetrators would know. However, counsel for the defense claim that Scott's confession was the result of coercion, that the several hours spent being questioned in the interrogation room had the intentional effect of having a psychological toll on him, and that whatever information he divulged came from either previous knowledge or from repeating back to police phrases that they had already laid out. The most astonishing evidence revealing unethical interrogation practices is clearly seen in the recordings captured during Scott's forced confession. Detective Merrill brought a revolver into the interrogation room to help Scott remember what he may have done at the yogurt shop that night through role-playing. Merrill walked around with a pistol, then stood behind Scott and jabbed him in the head with what appeared to be the gun's muzzle. Merrill testified that he used his finger and not a pistol. Nonetheless, the brief video clip is shocking. Hector Polanco, one of the detectives conducting the yogurt shop interrogations, was accused of coercing confessions in another controversial case involving exonerated defendants Christopher Ochoa and Richard Danziger. Both were released after 13 years in prison. Danziger suffered a permanent brain injury due to an assault in prison. 7 jurors have said that they would not have convicted Scott and Springsteen if this evidence had been available at the time of the trials. Springsteen was convicted and sentenced to death, while Scott, who was 15 at the time of the crime, was sentenced to life in prison. After 2 grand juries failed to indict them, the charges against Wellborn and Pierce were withdrawn. However, it was ruled that the prosecution's strategy of using excerpts of each defendant's alleged confessions at the trial of the other defendant violated the confrontation clause because the co-defendant was not a witness. In 2009, both men's convictions were overturned based solely on the confrontation clause and were released. Austin police admit that over 50 people had confessed to the yogurt shop murders. Serial killer Kenneth Allen McDuff was considered a suspect in the murders after he confessed on the day of his execution. At the trial of Scott and Springsteen, McDuff's presence in Austin and possession of a map that would have located him within 3 blocks of the yogurt store were mentioned. Additionally, a witness claimed to have seen him the night of the murders near the store. Alex Briones, who was already wanted in San Antonio for raping a woman and setting her on fire, confessed to police in 1992 that the murders began as a robbery, that the girls were bound, gagged and raped before being shot, that there were 2 guns used and the second looked like a silver semi-automatic, and that napkins and cardboard boxes were stacked on the bodies before the fire was set. All of these details were purportedly confidential and corresponded to the offense. The investigators eliminated both of these individuals as suspects. Finding a motive for the yogurt store murders is nearly impossible. We can only speculate on what was going through the perpetrators' minds. The most likely scenario is that the murders were planned by one or more sexual predators who had watched the store and knew that teenage girls were running it. Setting fire to destroy evidence was a calculated move by seasoned criminals, not by the 4 teenage boys who were falsely accused and 2 convicted of the murders. None of the suspects' DNA was found at the scene. Indeed, there was not an atom of physical evidence or a single witness that could tie these suspects to the crime, noted one journalist. If the fire didn't eradicate vital evidence, the firemen's hoses would. Because the crime scene was severely burned and saturated in water, it wasn't easy to find evidence. In the first few hours after the fire was extinguished, firefighters repeatedly entered the property, followed by paramedics and arson investigators from the Austin Fire Department, the Travis County Medical Examiner, and ultimately crime scene investigators from the Department of Public Safety. The contamination of the crime scene was significant. Detective John Jones, the first Austin police officer to arrive on the scene, later said, "There were enough people in that we couldn't control everything that was going out the doors." Even with CSI on the scene, evidence was not preserved, and entire store areas such as the restrooms, dumpsters, and the front entrance were not processed. In addition to fingerprints and DNA evidence from 5 hairs on the girls' corpses, police eventually discovered multiple shell cartridges and a magazine for a semi-automatic handgun. Police found denim fabric, a heart-shaped belt buckle that had belonged to Ayers but no belt, and a ring belonging to Sarah Harbison's boyfriend in a pile of girls' clothing near the back door. There is renewed optimism that a piece of evidence recovered from the crime scene on the night of the heinous act will be the determining factor in resolving the case. Rosemary Lemberg, the Travis County, Texas district attorney at the time, was determined to retry Springsteen and Scott after their release. But before doing so, her office decided to utilize YSTR testing, a relatively new form of DNA testing at the time. It was a method for finding and extracting only male DNA. YSTR testing was conducted on vaginal samples taken from the victims. An incomplete male DNA profile was obtained from one of the girls' swabs, but to the district attorney's office's astonishment, the DNA sample did not match any of the 4 arrested men. According to DNA expert and genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, YSTR DNA is sometimes utilized in criminal cases. Moore stated that it can eliminate nearly everyone except for the suspect. Nonetheless, prosecutors were intent on retrying Springsteen and Scott. But before they could do so, they needed to figure out who the DNA belonged to. More than 100 men, including crime scene investigators and medical examiners who may have had contact with the body and been a potential source of contamination, were tested, according to District Attorney Lemberg. There were no matches. Officials spent years trying to identify the origin of the mysterious DNA. Then, in 2017, an Austin police detective searched a public online DNA database used for population studies to see if he could find a match. Incredibly, he did. But there was a problem with what appeared to be the most promising lead in years. The matching sample in the public database had been submitted by the FBI anonymously and had no identity attached. When Austin officials contacted the FBI to obtain a name, the FBI refused to provide it, citing privacy laws. Frustrated, city officials sought help from U.S. Representative Michael McCaul. McCaul exerted pressure on the FBI, and in early 2020, the FBI consented to collaborate with the Austin Police Department to decide whether more testing of the YSTR DNA from the crime scene could be conducted. The retested sample did not match the FBI sample, but McCaul and Austin's officials have said that they will only rest once they ascertain whose DNA was found at the scene. McCaul stated, We're waiting for the DNA science to improve to then resubmit what we have left in the crime lab for further testing. McCall believes that one day, as DNA research advances rapidly, the DNA sample obtained 31 years ago will ultimately solve the case. It's everything, he said. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.